Hi everyone. Today I'm going to show you how you can create an avocado that you can 3D print using Blender. If you're brand new to Blender or at 3D printing or 3D modeling, this is a good place to start. My name is Eric from Squish Creations. Let's get started. All right, so this first part of the tutorial is going to cover some of the basics of Blender, and then in the next part we're going to cover some shaping. So let's go over some basics. If you haven't downloaded Blender yet, you can come here to blender.org/download and hit the big download button. In my case, I'm using Mac, using Apple Silicon, so I'm going to go down here to other versions and grab the Apple Silicon version. So once it's all downloaded, we can open up Blender, and it's going to ask us some questions about our preferences, whether you want left or right click to select. I think all of these are just fine, so I'm just going to hit next. And then under new file, I'm going to hit general. So here is the default Blender file. We've got a cube, we've got a camera, we've got a light, and we can zoom in on our cube using the scroll wheel. We can orbit around our cube by clicking the middle mouse button and dragging our mouse, and we can hold shift middle mouse button to pan the camera. All right, so those are the basic mouse controls. I want to start from scratch though. So when we want to manipulate objects, we could do it with this just fine, but let's start completely from scratch by box selecting all of these and then hitting X and then deleting. And then coming up here to add mesh cube. So we just deleted the default cube to add another cube. So let's talk about transformation. We can transform this cube by moving, scaling, and rotating. To move, you could come up here to the left side and grab these handles. I'm going to Control Z to undo, or Command Z if you're on a Mac. Or the easier way to move is to hit G and then move your mouse around. So it's going to follow my mouse. But let's say, this is kind of a weird spot here. Let's only move it on the X-axis, for example. So I can say GX, and now it's only going to follow my mouse on the X-axis. And let's say, well, this isn't where I want it. I want it to be back at the origin. So I'm going to say Alt-G to reset the scale. Reset the movement. Now let's move on to scale, which is the S key. We can scale up and down like this. And again, we can scale along a certain axis, like the Y-axis. We can cancel our action by hitting right click instead of left click. And then let's talk about how to scale on every axis except a certain axis. So let's say S Shift Z. So this is going to scale it on every axis but the Z axis. And you can see that it's getting wider and longer, but it's not getting taller, right? And then we can say Alt-S to reset our scale. Now, rotation, same idea. We hit R, and then we move our mouse, and it's going to follow on all axes. Or I could specify an axis like the Z-axis, and now it's going to rotate only on the Z-axis. Now, a quick note about rotation. For a while, I was like, okay, I know how I want this object to rotate, but I don't know which axis that's supposed to be. Well, the way I think about it now is that my object is a marshmallow, and my axis is a marshmallow skewer. So if I say rotate along the X-axis, now this red line is acting as my marshmallow skewer, and I'm kind of rotating my marshmallow over a fireplace. This is a quick tip to remember. All right, so that's transformation. Now let's talk about edit mode. So if we hit the tab key, you can see that our object kind of changes. You get these dots on the corners and stuff. What's up with that? This is called edit mode, and it allows you to further manipulate your object by grabbing pieces and parts of it. So if I grab one of these cubes with a left click and then hit G, then I can move it around just like I was moving the whole object, but now it's just one vertex that I'm moving. And I can shift select a couple or 3 vertices and move all those around, and I can scale them up and down. So that is vertex select mode. If I hit 2 on the number bar, now we've switched to edge select mode. And you can see up here, if I hit 1, it's vertex, 2 is edge, and 3 is face. So in edge select mode, I can grab an edge, which is a line connecting two vertices, and I can do the same thing, move it, scale it, I can rotate it. And then finally we have face select, so I can grab any face of this cube and I can move it, scale it, and rotate it. All right, so that is edit mode. So we are working in Blender specifically for 3D printing. And by default, Blender uses meters, which if we work in meters, that's going to be just fine. If we export our object that's like 10 meters tall, it's going to recognize that, hey, that's like 1,000 times bigger than it should be. And it's smart enough to put it in millimeters. But for the sake of best practices, let's change to millimeters. So the way that we change our units is by going here to the Scene Properties tab, which looks like a drop and a lens and a dot, and hit the Units drop down, and you can see that we're in the metric system, and our length is meters. So let's grab that and change to millimeters. So now we're in millimeters, but the size of our object didn't change. It's just now measured in millimeters. So to change it to, like, you know, be single millimeters, we go up here to unit scale and make it 1/1000th of the default. So we say 0.001. So now our object is actually, you know, the single digit millimeter scale. And you might have noticed we lost our grid. What happened was that we just zoomed in our viewport by 1,000 times, so the grid is really big now. And the way to get our grid back is by going up here to overlays, show overlays, and then change the scale to 0.001, and now our grid is visible again. So now we're working in millimeters, which is great for 3D printing. There's one important thing that I want to note here, and it's that this cube, if we go to object properties, this orange box, the scale says it's 1 by 1 by 1. But please understand that there's a difference between scale and dimensions. So it's not a 1 by 1 by 1 millimeter cube. It's actually, if we hit the N key, N as in Nancy, we'll find that the dimensions are actually 2 by 2 by 2 millimeters, right? So again, there's a difference between scale and dimensions. And this is something that confused me for a long time. I would work on a model, I would export it, and it was always twice as big as I thought it was. And that's because, you know, the default is 2 units, dimensional units, instead of 1. But the scale unit, I know it's confusing. So to change this, we can go down to dimensions, select all of them by grabbing all of them and hitting 1. And then our scale is now half as big, but we want the scale to be 1. So we say Command A or Control A and hit scale. So now our scale and our dimensions are both 1. So if we scale this up and down, we can see that our scale units match our dimensional units. Awesome. So I'm gonna reset my scale by hitting Alt S. And now we have a 1 by 1 by 1 cube, which is great to work with for 3D printing. Now, let's say this is the scene that I want to see every time I start a Blender, because I know I'm going to be working with 3D printing a lot. So I can come up here to File and go to Defaults, Save Startup File, and then it's going to ask me to click to confirm. So I'll say yes. So we've saved the startup file, and there's just one more thing that I want to cover about the settings in Blender. If we go up here to Edit, Preferences, and then come down here to System, you can see that this undo steps is by default 32. This determines how many undos you can make in a row using Control Z or Command Z. I make a lot of mistakes, so I'm going to up the number to something like 200 because, you know, I'm clumsy. And then I'm going to close this out, and I think we're all ready to go. So that's going to conclude this part of the tutorial. And the next part, we're going to take this cube and shape it into the base shape of an avocado. My name is Eric from Squish Creations. Thank you for watching.